So thank you all so much again for being here. My name is Sarah. I am one of the 3 Forward California co-chairs, and I'm going to pass it off without further ado to my other 2 fellow co-chairs to introduce themselves. Then we'll go ahead and get started. And I'll start with Mike.
Hello, everybody. It's nice to see so many folks here in attendance. My name is Mike Tadaro. I'm one of the 3 elected co-chairs here at Forward California. You won't be hearing or seeing too much of me today. I'll be in the background answering some of your questions in real time during the Q&A portion. But I'm just so excited to be here with you and to be here with our friends at Braver Angels. And I just can't wait to hear what the panelists have to say. So thank you. Nice to see you and talk to you later.
Thank you, Mike. And Rick. Rick, you're muted.
Hi everyone. I'm glad I was muted because I did not start off with the greatest introduction. I'm Rick. I'm one of the other Forward California co-chairs and really excited to be here. Have followed along with Braver Angels work for a while now, and I think at this time, these sorts of conversations are needed more than ever. So thanks to all our panelists.
All right. Thank you both. Again, it's an honor for Forward California to put this together. And we really are a party that advocates for transparency, information, communication, collaboration. So that is what we hope to demonstrate tonight. So Rick, if you wouldn't mind switching to the next slide. Thank you. So really quickly, tonight's agenda, we're going to go through some speaker introductions so you all can get to know your panelists for the night. We're going to have a robust, roughly 40 to 45 minute long panel conversation. It's going to be fireside chat style. We'll be asking them questions and they'll be answering. And then we have roughly 20 minutes allocated to an audience Q&A. So please make sure if you have any questions for our panelists at all, use the Q&A function in the Zoom webinar to submit your question. And then I will ask the panelists at the end of the panel. Finally, we'll close with some final remarks, some links, some QR codes, some upcoming events so that we can keep the momentum going. All right, thank you. Next slide. So we know we have a lot of Forward Party members on the call tonight, but we also might have a lot of Braver Angels members and some that are independent of both organizations. So I want to quickly introduce you all to Forward Party. We would consider ourselves and we pride ourselves in being a party of the future. We believe in a modern democracy, a political system that works for everyone, where every voice is heard. We advocate for innovative and data-driven solutions and candidates. We collaborate with organizations and we also collaborate with each other, and we inspire candidates and political officials that collaborate with each other and are consensus focused. And we also consider ourselves to be a pragmatic, responsible, and realistic party of the future. We are at a point right now in our growth as a party that we're fostering productive relationships and working partnerships with organizations. We are organizing at the local level all across the state of California. We are supporting forward-aligned candidates. We just had a slate of forward-endorsed candidates during the 2024 election cycle, and we are working to inspire a change to the status quo. So that's a really quick rundown of what Forward Party and Forward California is all about. Next slide, please. But let's get into the meat and potatoes of this conversation. I know why we're all probably here tonight, and it's to reflect and learn from what this year has entailed. No matter who you voted for, regardless of your political affiliation, you are probably exhausted emotionally, politically, physically, mentally from what the last couple of weeks looked like. And that there is data and statistics to completely validate how you're feeling. Politics, and specifically fighting over politics, is tearing us, the United States, apart. According to Pew Research, this is how Americans feel about politics today. They feel exhausted and angry, and a very, very underwhelming minority of Americans feel hopeful or excited. That does not sound like a robust democracy, and it does not sound like the people what they deserve. So that is why we're hosting this conversation tonight. And most importantly, that is why we have Braver Angels. Next slide, please. We want to introduce you all tonight to Braver Angels. Their whole ethos is to depolarize America through connection, collaboration, conversation with the people. These people standing before you tonight are representative of many different political identities, but are all coming together to vulnerably share their experiences with you. Next slide, please. I would encourage you all at your own time to go onto Braver Angels' website and explore a little bit more about their mission, about the work that they've done, about their YouTube videos that they have for everybody to watch. But right now we want to share on this screen for you a little bit about their message for people. And we'll just highlight a little bit. We don't have to read it all, but the point of Braver Angels is really quite inspiring. That Braver Angels says, we state our views freely and fully without fear. We treat people who disagree with us with honesty, dignity, and respect. We welcome opportunities to engage those with whom we disagree. I'm just going to stop right there. We're at a time in our country where even that might stimulate some kind of visceral response from people. And that is so heartbreaking and unfortunate, because at the end of the day, we're all trying to make this country a better place for everybody. So that is why we so desperately need Braver Angels. And with that, we're going to go ahead and shut off the PowerPoint presentation, expand all of our panelists onto the screen, and I'm going to allow each of them to introduce themselves to you, starting with Barbara.
Hi, yeah, my name is Barbara Farmer, and I am in Southern California in Rancho Palos Verdes, which is maybe 10 miles or so south of LAX airport. I consider myself leaning red, although I'm not affiliated with any party currently. I consider myself kind of libertarian light. And I've been in Braver Angels since 2019. I started, I saw a workshop locally in Palos Verdes and just really enjoyed the vigorous, honest, but civil conversation with people that agreed with me, and particularly with people that disagreed with me. It was really refreshing. There was another workshop that I noticed in Orange County, which was about an hour away from me. And I thought, I'm going to do that one too. And I met some wonderful people at that workshop. One of them is on this call, Mary Thomas-Vallens, and one of them introduced us to the Forward Party of California, Susan Rico, who we decided we wanted to start an alliance, which now we have over 2,000 people on our mailing list. So it's been quite a journey, but it's been a delightful one.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And Mary, passing it over to you.
Okay. I'm Mary Thomas-Vallens in Irvine, California. I lean blue. I guess I'm some of the surveys I've taken, I'm a traditional liberal, whatever that is. But anyway, the event that Barbara mentioned, so a friend just asked me to join her for this Braver Angels Red Blue workshop. And at the time I was teaching full time and my weekends were filled with correcting papers and whatever. And I said, if I'm not thrilled with it by lunch, I'm going to politely leave. And the very first exercise when I met Barbara and Susan and some of the other people, I was in the blue group, they were in the red group, and I'm so embarrassed to say, I did not realize I had such stereotypes about reds that were not true. When I met Barbara and Susan, they just shocked me, and it made me realize that I needed Braver Angels. So now I'm a part of the Braver Angels moderator training team. And I created the Braver Angels School Community Network. So we work with schools and teens and parents. And then also, like Barbara said, the Orange County co-chair. So that's me.
Thank you so much, Mary, for sharing and for being here tonight. Now I'll pass it over for Brady to introduce himself.
Thank you. And hi, everyone. I'm Brady Young. I'm here in San Diego, California, relatively new to California. My roots are in Colorado, so I carry some of the mountains with me over here to the beach. But It's awesome to be here. And I encountered Braver Angels in 2021. Um, I was blessed by the YouTube algorithm, really, in short, is what it was. I was on this pursuit of investigating my own beliefs from kind of what I was inherited or what I grew up with. And I just was on this pursuit. It was kind of out of a crisis of faith. So my faith beliefs and political beliefs, I was just walking down this path trying to figure it out for myself. So I was furiously Googling things and YouTube, looking at specific topics, and a Braver Angels debate came up. And at the time, any debate kind of fired me up. I'm like, oh, let's see some fireworks. But the nature of the debate was such, first of all, the structure of it was not set up in competition with one side with versus the other, but it really was just a free sharing of what people thought on the topic. And the beauty was there wasn't really any subject matter experts. It was people just bringing their humanity to the conversation. And I emphasize that because I think a lot of people in political conversations think, oh, I don't have training in this, or my voice may not be as well received as someone that spent a lot of time on this issue. But the reality is, we all live and breathe in this country, and we all have a valuable voice to share. And so I think Braver Angels does that really well, and just uplifting all voices. So that, led me to jumping into one of the workshops. Our first one that we recommend is a Depolarizing Within workshop, which really is more of a reflective event where you're kind of analyzing your own personal biases, um, what really activates you. And so that just got me really curious to learn more. And in San Diego, we had some momentum to start an alliance, and I was kind of voluntold to be one of the co-chairs, but happily accepted. And we've been going for a little over 2 years now. I forgot to say, I'm really all over the place when it comes to my leaning, but in a Braver Angels context on most issues, uh, I have an affinity, I guess, towards the red side, but it does come down to the topic. And yeah, I think that's good for now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brady, and we'll hear more from you later. I'm going to pass it off now to Maxim. And if you, oh, there
Thank
we
you
go.
for figuring out how to pronounce not my name. Terrific. Thank you all for being here. I live in Berkeley, California, and of course I lean blue because if I told people I leaned anything but, I'd be tarred, feathered, and run out of town. But that's the atmosphere of the Bay Area blue bubble that I live in. Just before COVID, I had heard about Braver Angels. I got in touch with them and I decided to form an alliance, which are local chapters of the entire organization. It was originally going to be a Berkeley one. It turned into a Berkeley Oakland one. And then we managed to assimilate the San Francisco group into us like the Borg assimilates things. So we sucked them in. Actually, once COVID started, we had just 2 live meetings. And ever since then, we've been on Zoom, which fortunately allows other people throughout the country to have access to our Zoom meetings, which means a better opportunity to get people who do not live in the Bay Area blue bubble to participate. And we feel we've been relatively successful in making our meetings balanced. So and then the other thing is that Braver Angels has a plethora of phenomenal workshops and debates that are well constructed, well proven, and actually bring a lot of people into the organization. Our alliance doesn't do those workshops or debates. We have a small subcommittee that meets weekly. We plan an issue for the month. We have a monthly Zoom meeting, same time every month. And the Zoom meeting ends up going into breakout rooms. We use tools in those breakout rooms that we think are critical, and they're mainly attentive listening. So very specifically, if I voted for Trump, I have 4 minutes to tell everybody why. No one's allowed to interrupt me or make faces or grimace. The next person gets to state their point of view, but has to repeat what they've heard neutrally from me that I've said. And we find that that specific tool, which was actually adopted from another organization, is phenomenal in breaking down barriers and humanizing us to each other. So I gotta say, for me, it's beyond ecstasy that I'm talking to people whose reality is completely opposite mine. For instance, Paul below me, we're we're really different, and we go around presenting Braver Angels together. So we have radically different points of view, and we accept each other, and we're friends. Well, that's happened a lot, and we find that we have more in common with people, even who have different, for instance, political points of view than we do, and it's the commonality that we end up witnessing and being ecstatic about. That's all. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Maxim. And also, you provided a great segue into our final introduction. Last but not least, let's have Paul introduce himself.
So we have a wonderful example here of different perspectives. Maxim saw me as being below him. I was on my screen, I was to his right. But then, Sarah, when you spoke up, I moved to Maxim's left. So Maxim are now to the right of me. Paul Norris, San Francisco, my political leaning, libertarian, but I find myself quite red in the current political environment, although I consider myself a classical liberal. And my point of view is I didn't leave the left left me. I'm pretty much where I have been. Braver Angels. So I've been involved in Braver Angels since 2017. If I were to pick out one particular thing that makes Braver Angels feel very important to me, it's that my profession as a psychotherapist is full of people who are so blue, they don't even know they're blue. And going to graduate school in about 2010 to get into this post-retirement career, I had a brutal experience as a straight old white man. Basically, my demographics were enough to earn me contempt. And it didn't matter, how smart I was or how loving I was or how open-minded I was, because the people who were judging me had none of those things going for them. Role within Braver Angels. Well, I started Braver Angels, I think, about 2017. And initially, I was involved in every single program. Well, that's not possible anymore, like songwriting contests, stuff like that. Totally out of my wheelhouse. But what am I involved in now? Well, I lead the Red Caucus along with Barbara Farmer, who is somewhere on your screen. I won't claim that it's where I see her because you may see her in a different place. Moderator, I am a state coordinator for California, although I tend to focus on Northern California. So I leave Mary alone down there in Southern California. I'm on the debate executive committee, and I'm in the ambassador program. And Maxim and I have a tap dance that we do together on ambassador presentations that seems to go over quite well, where the main point that we make is that we actually like each other and get along with each other. And so that's probably the main point that comes across in our presentations. And I will call on the next person, except there isn't one because I'm the last one.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul, and to all of our panelists for that wonderful introduction. So without further ado, we're going to get into the fireside chat. But before we do, there is one more point that I want to make to all nearly 70 of you in this room, which is that in our day and age, especially this shortly after an election, disclosing your political affiliation or beliefs is an act of courage. And also it opens and subjects yourself to scrutiny, to judgment, to a lot of, assumptions about who you are as a person, which may not be true at all. We are all complex, nuanced individuals who have unique and separate lived experiences The only thing that we have in common is that we are all different, but we are all human. So I challenge you all during this panel to listen to the words of these panelists and see where you find yourself represented, or maybe where you find yourself challenged in agreeing with them. And maybe that's a growth opportunity. And please allow yourself to feel what you're feeling authentically. It's an interesting time for everybody right now, which is why we're so glad you took an hour and a half out of your schedules this shortly after a very contentious election to be here tonight. So thank you. All right, we're going to go forward with the first question. And this first question, everybody is going to answer it. I'll go ahead and pick on someone random, and then you guys can popcorn it to each other from there, which is question number 1. Can you please share your political perspective, which a lot of you have already kind of done, and or share an experience in your life or in the life of maybe someone you know and love that was formative to your unique political view? I will go ahead and call on Brady first and take it away.
Cool. When I think of my political perspective, I often come down to values. And even when I'm talking to someone else, I don't care as much about what you believe about this issue, but like why you believe what you believe. And so some of my values really come down to freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to be who you are, human dignity, that we're all created equal and there's no buts this or an asterisk here or anything. It's human dignity. We are all equal. Care for our planet, state sovereignty, respect for the law. We behave. We all agree to behave a certain way in this country, and we respect that. So those are some values. But I love the experience question because I think that brings a lot of story to it. So I was born in Littleton, Colorado, and on April 20th, 1999, was a Columbine school shooting, and I was only 5 at the time. But this was a very formative experience for me because in one instance, I just recognized panic and fear and didn't know what the heck was going on. But then shortly after that, I remember gathering with the community at the park. And my dad and I made a cross, and we raised the cross, and people are there just weeping, and really like a crisis communal contemplation of what's taking place. And what birthed from that is what I remember growing up. It wasn't so much the pain and the suffering, but really the unifying spirit that came through, and got to go to high school at Columbine and learn from a lot of the teachers that were there and the coaches. And so from a young age, I just kind of recognized what can come out of tragedy. And then in 3rd grade was 9/11. And that was a similar experience where at a young age, I'm still like, I don't know what is going on, but I can just feel the terror, in my teacher's eyes, my parents' eyes. But then my mind goes to those moments at games and sporting events and things that just felt like unity in the country. And so it was like, wow, there's something more here, how in fear, what can come from that. And then Obama getting elected when I was 18 in high school was also another one, because I mentioned I was kind of questioning just what I inherited in terms of beliefs from the people around me. And, they're disappointed that their person did not get elected. But I was sitting in a classroom with my history teacher at the time. The coolest Black man, Coach Moore, he's one of my favorite guys. And he was sitting there weeping in joy of watching, we were all watching Obama's inauguration speech together. And the way that classroom just felt, and the unity, and again, where even at a young age, you could sense the country just at this heightened level of kind of panic, fear, division, in a moment just felt unified. So those are just some formative experiences for me that I try to carry now, that like, even in the panic, this isn't the final story. There is hope. There's something to look forward to. That keeps you moving forward through the storm, really. So those are a few experiences that I come back to often.
Thank you, Brady. Really, really beautiful, and hope. It's an inspiring message that we need today. And whoever's feeling called to speak next, go for it.
I'll go next because Brady, you almost made me cry. And you make me feel very old. So that's the other. So I grew up in a family of very staunch Democrats, and for my younger life, I was a Democrat. I voted Democrat like my family. But I always was a bit of a contrarian, and quite honestly, I never felt like when I started thinking about the Democratic policies, I never felt a deep commitment. That they didn't really resonate with me. They sounded good to me, but they didn't resonate with my feeling of with my worldview, how the world works. So I started reading a lot of conservative and libertarian authors, Thomas Sowell, Friedrich Hayek, Robert Nisbet. I could go on. I did a whole lot of reading, and found that those conservative libertarian principles resonated with me much more. My background is in cognitive science, and I'm always interested in how people think, how people make decisions, and those policies, those principles seem to fit more with the way the world really works. And some of those principles, like my guiding principle, I think very similar to Brady's, is the idea of individual liberty is really important, especially freedom of expression. I think without that, without freedom of expression, we cannot have a society that functions well. Other principles are free markets, meritocracy. I know there's a stereotype of people on the right that we're not the most caring people, but I think there's just a different perspective on the right about where that care should come from. And that's part of a personal responsibility, that we should not look to the government for helping those in need. That help should come close to home as possible. Family, friends, community groups, churches, synagogues, mosques, community centers. And the government should be a last resort for providing assistance. I think, for me, I think those values and those principles make for a more orderly society. But I'm libertarian in the sense that I don't necessarily believe that all those principles should be legislated. I think people should be free to join communities that work for them. And so that's where I'm not, I don't believe that a lot of those conservative policies should be legislated. I think community norms should really help shape people's behavior in a way that fits their own worldview. So I guess if I had to sum it up, I would say limited government, maximum freedom to make individual personal choices.
I'll go next. First of all, thank you, Brady and Barbara, for your eloquence and your hearts and your minds. I'm really proud to be in the same organization that you're in, because I knew neither of you. So this is terrific. Thank you. Sarah, I just want to mention, you said the talk would hopefully be interesting. My understanding that in China, to say may your life be interesting is a curse. So we'll just have to see.
Interesting times. That is the curse. You live in interesting times. and I think we do. So maybe we are cursed.
It's a burden anyhow, and it's a responsibility. My background, I was born in LA, and I'm what they call a red diaper baby. My parents were communists, Jewish communists. And so, but also if you're a communist, everybody knows that religion is the opiate of the masses. So I was not allowed to go to my friends' bar mitzvahs. Anybody who talked about God was beneath contempt, weak, prejudiced, just undeserving of attention. And so when I left that environment, I challenged myself to talk to people that I had been taught to fear. So I ended up talking to a lot of people who believed in God. And my life expanded because the vocabulary of spirituality and religion is beyond the vocabulary of Marxism. And so it was, and now my wife says I use the word God more than most believers that she knows, because I tend to go to people and say, "Hi, what church do you go to?" or what's your belief? And no one ever shies away from giving me an answer. And then I find out about what their values are. I mean, and we can share deep feelings about each other very, very quickly. So that's been wonderful. That was project number one. My life has expanded. So then project number two, being in Berkeley, talk to anybody who voted for Trump. We Berkeleyans think or thought that anybody who lived on the other side of the hills, except maybe Chicago and New York, was uninformed, prejudiced. They should know better. And of course, we have great college degrees and went to Cal, and our values are much better than everybody else's. So we really need to teach them the right way. Boy, was it wonderful going to the rest of the country. I'm lucky enough to have acquaintances in places like Ohio and Texas, where people think differently. And guess what? It's likewise expanding. It was just wonderful to encounter people whose values might be different from mine, but then it turned out that I can't resist respecting absolutely the way they're conducting their lives, appreciating their backgrounds, asking their stories. What brought you here? What is it that made you think the way you do? And my current motto is something like, there are 8 billion truths on the planet, because each of us culturally or neurologically or psychologically or spiritually actually has a different way of receiving the information that bombards us from outside of ourselves. And because of that, if we can really drop the idea that our personal way of seeing things is the only way, it expands us. And I think it's actually spiritual work. And I use that word spiritual guardedly, but my arch nemesis, Paul, that we talk about a lot, agrees with that word. And so that's something pretty deep that we share that's way more important than our different political perspectives. And that's what happened for me in Braver Angels. That's all. Whoops.
Hearing my name used in vain, I'll go next, and Mary, I'll let you do wrap up. You
okay.
go last, which makes you the most important person. So I think I was born with a love of freedom. I think I was born libertarian. I can't look back on my childhood or see anything that made me that. So I think it's genetic. So growing up, I grew up in a trailer park, but somehow I managed to get a scholarship and get into Caltech. I actually thank the USSR and Sputnik for that. It became important to get these blue collar kids who were reasonably smart into engineering. But still, my family, farmers, truck drivers, police, and military. And even though these aren't the people I hang out with these days because they're on another part of the country, I feel a connection. I feel a connection to them. And when I read J.D. Vance's book, that wasn't like a book for me. That was like my life. Another thing that I think is probably very formative for me is that in the Boy Scouts, I learned firearms and firearm safety, and it's something I was actually pretty good at. It seemed to come to me naturally. I owned my own rifle when I was in grade school. And the funny thing is, I was a bullied kid, but it never occurred to me that there was any connection between a gun and being bullied. It wouldn't even come into my mind. Somehow I lost my way and became a Berkeley radical for a while. Maxim and I were both Berkeley radicals at Berkeley at the same time. And I don't know if we ever actually encountered each other or not. We might have and just not even know it.
He went
But
to the dark side.
but I grew up. And part of where I grew up was going to Apple and working there in the 1980s. And I suddenly really discovered there really is opportunity in America. And somehow I was still carrying, a lot of my old blue collar, you can't get ahead stuff. And, I came to realize, no, actually, you can succeed and get ahead. So that's kind of my story. I've really focused on the life events because I'm a psychotherapist. That's what we do. And Mary, you get to hit a home run with the bases loaded. You're up
Oh,
next.
no, this feels really challenging. I do want to point out to everybody a couple things based on what I heard and a couple things in the chat. Notice how the personal story is so important. And that's what in many of our workshops, we ask people what personal experience brought you to your thinking. And it really has helped me think beyond the labels. And later on, we're going to talk about when we use labels and when we don't. In terms of the impact from childhood, it's kind of like my story, although it's not as violent in terms of what Brady actually encountered directly, like being in the same community at Columbine. But I felt like events in my life, like his life in early childhood, teenage years, really shaped. So my teenage years were in the 60s and 70s during the Vietnam War. I was in first grade when JFK was assassinated. I'll never forget that day. My teachers came out crying. Then a few years later, Martin Luther King was killed, and then Robert F. Kennedy. So 3 assassinations of major figures. Robert Kennedy was probably going to be the Democratic candidate that year if he hadn't already made it. So it was huge to find that violent ending. And also the civil rights movements were going on, seeing Black people hosed down, having guards help children get into classrooms because people were yelling and shouting at them because of their color. And then in high school was Watergate. And I also read Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, and it was all about how women went from being very helpful in the 40s during the World War II. They had jobs that they never had before. The men came home, the women had to go back into the house. And, some of you may not know if this group is younger. I mean, women weren't even allowed to open bank accounts, have credit cards, own property until like the 60s. And even there was a time when a woman had to get permission from her husband to get birth control pills. I mean, it's really a different time. So these really shaped me, and that may have made me lean blue. But one of the comments is, can we find a political middle? And one thing I've noticed is the more I'm involved with Braver Angels and have conversations with people across the political spectrum, when they're really in a problem-solving mode and really looking for solutions, I'm hearing so many ideas that I'd never considered. And so I do think there's a place in the middle that might be a place where problem solving can happen. In addition to this, and this is where I feel like today, younger people have not seen the civility that I grew up in. Watergate, Nixon, when he was investigated, he was investigated by mainly people in his own party. And then my dad and I, in middle school and high school, he and I sat and watched the entire Democrat and Republican conventions, gavel to gavel, as much as they had on prime time. It wasn't like you had cable every minute. And my dad was a Republican his whole life. He lived to 100. And he modeled for me that respect for both parties. So I grew up where people across the aisle worked together. They would go play golf together. They would have dinner together. And there wasn't this animosity that I see now. And so I think that really has shaped me to be, I say I lean, but it's like Brady, there's certain issues that are really important to me that make me lean blue. But there have been times in local elections I have voted outside my party because I met the person, I heard the person, I valued the human being and the goals that that person had. So I try to be really open-minded, but Braver Angels meeting Barbara, and I don't know what I thought a traditional red was, even though I grew up with my dad who was intelligent. Barbara just blew me away, and I went, okay, I need this. I'm not depolarized. So anyway, that's that for now.
Amazing. Thank you all for your vulnerability and for helping us see just the start of what is a very nuanced conversation. I think this is making us all look at the way that we talk to people maybe a little bit differently. So we're going to go to the next question. This next question is for Maxim, Paul, and Barbara in that order. And in about 2 minutes or less each, can you please explain to everybody in the room what was your reaction to the recent presidential election, starting with Maxim?
I think he just gave you his reaction. He held his head.
Well, I'm sorry, Maxim is divided. He's a divided guy. And along with the horror of bad man Trump being elected and the position that anybody who voted for him was wrong and misled, et cetera, I also empathized with all my friends who were relieved by his election because they felt that an oppressive 4 years or whatever of the Democratic Party had limited their rights, had limited economic growth. The government had grown beyond control. And so they feel that this is like a breath of fresh air for them. And so I was not nearly as much in despair as the friends I have that usually I say to someone, look, if you want to learn a little something, go talk to somebody who voted opposite you. And in Berkeley, that means anybody who voted for Trump. And most of my friends say, well, I don't know anybody who did. And if I did, I wouldn't talk to them anyhow. So I'm lucky. And then I'm just waiting to see what happens. Frankly, I hope that some of the policies that arise now will be more effective in making our country a better place. So I'm fortunate that I'm not totally in despair, and I'll just keep on hoping.
So I initially felt joy and relief.
Yeah.
I remember I had a conversation the day before the election with another red. I expected Kamala to win, and my advice to my friend was embrace the suck. Now I'm kind of like at a wait and see place. And I think, I mean, it's obvious Trump intends to shake things up. Some people feel that that's not needed. I feel that it's very much needed. And I look forward to Elon and Vivek and the DOGE, Department of Governmental Efficiency, noting, for example, that I think $2 trillion has been added to government expenses, I believe, since Biden was elected. I wish that Trump stood for fiscal responsibility. He doesn't, but I have more hope that he will get us to some kind of fiscal responsibility than the other side. And all that said, I am really glad for constitutional restraints. No matter how much power the president may think he has or may decide he wants to have, this is a constitutional republic. And everybody is subject to checks and balances. So I am grateful for those checks and balances.
Yeah, I resonate with Paul's comments a great deal. I am happier that I did vote for Trump, one of those uninformed people, Maxine, that voted for Trump. And I'm happier than I would have been had Harris won. But it's not without trepidation that I voted for Trump. I think it was Jason Calacanis. He's one of the hosts of the All In podcast. he is not a fan of Trump. I think some of the others there's four men on the podcast. David Sachs is one of them. A few of them are Trump supporters. A few of them are not Trump supporters. But Jason said something like, a Trump presidency is high risk, high reward. And I do agree with that. I think that is a good characterization. I don't think he did vote for Trump. He took the safer bet. I saw Harris as a high risk, low reward. So, I mean, that was my assessment. You know, one of the things that Paul said, though, I am very much in agreement with. I am a real supporter of checks and balances. No radical changes should be easy to make in the government. I think that restraint is really important in maintaining stable society. And I'm grateful that there's not a huge majority of either party, you know, House or Senate. I think the Republican Party is fractured enough in different factions that Republican senators will keep too much excess in check, and the House majority. Well, we don't know what the House majority is going to be yet, but it's going to be really small, whatever it is. And I think that's a good thing too, because that really forces both sides to work together. Hopefully they will. I'm hopeful, cautiously optimistic. I do like the idea of reducing all the regulation in the government. I think that will be helpful if it's done in a measured way.
Thank you three for answering the question so honestly and for sharing your unique perspective on the presidential election a few weeks ago. Our next question is for the two who didn't speak, Mary and Brady. And the question is, why does Braver Angels use political labels? Isn't that counterproductive to polarization or depolarization? And we'll go with Mary first.
Actually, we use labels and then we don't. So I feel uncomfortable with labels a lot of the time, and I've seen value in it in a few instances. For instance, I went to the Braver Angels convention 2 years ago, and the first thing we did when we checked in was given a lanyard with red or blue. And right there was one of the founders that I happened to know from working with him online. And I said, oh, do I really have to wear this? Like, he got to wear a white one because he was a founder. And I go, can I just not wear one? I don't want people to make assumptions about me. I don't like labels. And he said, Mary, for this weekend, try it and see what happens. And it was magical. We were on a college campus with a huge dining room, and the weather was beautiful. So people were outdoors, gathering indoors. And everywhere you looked, there were reds and blues talking to each other. And visually seeing that I teared up at times. Now, there's a workshop that Red Blue workshop where I met Barbara, and that was inviting reds and blues to explore stereotypes, misconceptions, and that's where labeling is important. There's another workshop, it's one of my very favorites, Depolarizing Within. We don't do any labeling at all. And it's a skills workshop. People are working on how to speak in a way that others can hear and listen and be ready for your perspective, especially when you disagree. So I think labels have a place. They're not required. You can say, I'm not going to share my red or blue label. And notice that we've all kind of said, well, I lean, but I'm not this. And now that I'm in Braver Angels, my views have been more modified or more, actually, I think broadened. So anyway, I don't want to go on and on because Brady needs a turn.
Well, I think it's important to mention that our organization started in the wake of the 2016 election, and it was very specific to this red-blue workshop Mary mentioned. So it was very partisan in that it was Republicans and Democrats coming together to work through these issues. And so that's kind of where the red-blue language came from. And I also think it's important and kind of cool to mention that one of our co-founders was a marriage and family therapist. So a lot of what we're looking at, polarization is such a huge issue, and with a bold mission of depolarizing America, we want to take a little sliver of this affective polarization, like the emotional standpoint, and not just that we disagree, but now I'm attaching an emotion that I think we disagree, and I think you're stupid, and I hate you. It's like you can't just disagree. But anyway, I think the labels, as Mary mentioned, nobody likes to be put in a box. Nobody likes that. Everyone's a mixed bag. But sometimes the labels and even the stereotypes, I think, are a helpful entrance into the conversation. So rather than unpacking all of your nuances and all of your biases and things, like, to start the conversation, I think it's helpful to just say where you're starting on a particular issue, or where you're arriving to the conversation on what side, and then you can start to unpack some of the things that are underlying those labels. So it's not that we want to put people in boxes. It's just saying, let's start the conversation this way, wear your lanyard, and then we can dive in with this general respect of dignity and the braver way that you read beautifully at the beginning. So we're not married to it. And that's the other thing. I think we've heard feedback as co-chair and as an event organizer. This is one of the biggest pushbacks we get. And so we make room in various events for not having labels, or rethinking how we structure these conversations, to someone else's point in the chat of like making room for the middle. It's like, we don't want to make this a partisan thing. We don't want to make our issue, our mission, we don't want to further the issue. So of course there's nuance across the board, but it is a helpful starting point for a conversation.
And I'll just add, sometimes we have skill events. The skill events are often not labeled. When we have issue events, they might be labeled, but it might be pro-life, pro-choice. So it just depends on the situation. And we're really thinking about that labeling very carefully, because we don't want it to be destructive. The one thing about Braver Angels, though, they really work hard to get red-blue balance in all its leadership, to maintain it from becoming biased in one. We need that pushback from each other to keep the doors open for everyone.
And let me just jump in and add, all of this flows from the fact that in America, when you go into the voting booth, you have to choose Democrat, Republican, or in almost all cases, somebody who has absolutely zero chance of winning. And that's really fundamentally, I think, where it all comes from. And this is what we have to deal with in Braver Angels.
Thank you. Thank you all for your wonderful contributions. I hadn't thought about labels in that way, honestly. But what I'm thinking is maybe we need more of them. So maybe that's where we come in, right? All right, so this next question is for Maxim and Brady, in that order. And the question is, what do you believe is at the heart of the right-left division?
Brady, would you start? I mean, I've thought about this a lot. I almost backed out of having to talk about the issue. Everybody's asking the question, and there aren't any specific answers, I dare say. I'll talk personally. Back in the 60s, when Paul and I were in Berkeley, the sentiment was there were us young student revolutionaries, and then there was the establishment. And that was an absolute polarization. There was us righteous people who wanted to make revolutionary change, and then there was everything else. And so I think polarization isn't particular to our particular time now. I think it's happened a lot. I think specifically about social media, and the fact that I think that tends to emphasize difference rather than emphasize togetherness. I think there's a loss of community organizations that used to unite people that don't anymore. But I think I'm supposed to answer the following question as well, so I'll stop for the meanwhile. Go ahead, Brady.
I'm glad you went first so I could collect some thoughts there. There's many ways to address this from a historical, anthropological, psychological. There's so many ways. I mentioned affective polarization, this emotional attachment to your disagreement. It's like if Sarah, you and I are going to lunch, I want tacos, you want pizza. It's one thing if we just disagree and we can work through that and eventually go to lunch. But if I think you're stupid for wanting pizza and I want tacos, we're probably not going to get through that and we're probably not going to be friends anymore. So it's like, I think that's at the heart, this emotional connection. But when I peel back like all of the layers, I try and really just filter things down. I think it does come down to the separateness. We're losing sight of our interconnectedness, our interdependence as humans, our shared humanity. We're just stuck in this dualistic thinking of good, bad, right, and wrong that naturally separate us. And so somehow we think we're separate from one another. And so I think we just need to reclaim this interconnectedness, and you can arrive at that from many different ways. For me, it's deeply spiritual, but it's also very scientific. And what we're learning in like quantum physics and quantum entanglement and things, the impact you make changes something else. And we as humans, we share that. And so somehow reclaiming that within yourself, I think is the answer. So I don't know. At the heart of it, I just think it's this separateness. And actually, one thing I'll add just briefly is that separateness and isolation is actually what breeds radicalization and extremism. So as we're processing what happens from this election, whether you're happy, sad, whatever, however you're processing it, do it in community, do it with other people. Because as soon as you isolate and you separate yourself, that's when things are just going to become more extreme. So just think about reclaiming our human story together, I think.
Let me just jump in. The answer that for me has the most explanatory power is the view of human nature. Thomas Sowell wrote a book, The Vision of the Anointed, that explains this very, very clearly. And so the explanation there is that on the left, people see human nature as perfectible, malleable, and changeable. And if we just pass the right laws, everything will be fine. People on the right see human beings as innately flawed and able to screw up just about anything. And we are always finding unintended consequences of things that are done with good intentions. So to me, that one single thing has more explanatory power than any other single explanation I have heard. For me.
Thank you so much. I can't believe how fast time is flying. And more importantly, I can't believe how many incredible questions we have from the audience. So we're going to change this panel up a little bit. I'm going to only ask 2 more questions. They're going to be open to anyone, but the format of the question will be a little bit different. And we'll try to wrap up these last 2 questions in the next 5 minutes so that we can give the audience as many of the answers as we possibly can. The first question is, if you were standing on stage at a TED Talk and you only had 1 sentence to capture the entire audience's attention, what would you say about how we break the cycle of political hatred and division in your first sentence of your TED Talk? And I'm going to open that up to anyone because I don't want to put anyone on the spot. Maxim, you have an answer. Win us over. Let's hear it.
My motto is shut up and listen. If I were going to say anything, how to unite the country, let's talk to each other. My way of making peace is to talk to the enemy. And I don't think we are good enough at listening to each other.
I'll give you one. If you're never uncomfortable, you'll never grow.
If we don't learn to get along and talk to each other, our children and our grandchildren will die.
And for me, hope is an action word, You know, hope is a noun, but I feel like I can't change the world, but I can affect the people that I see. And when I taught in school, I said, you have 3 feet of influence, the greatest influence. You can let someone cut in front of you in the shopping, you know, at a store when they're in a hurry. You can say thank you, you can say please, but you have the greatest impact 3 feet apart. And 3 feet apart now has been growing because I'm 3 feet, less than 3 feet away from you via Zoom. So I just feel like I can't change the world, but I can do one person at a time. And hearing people's stories has made me open to understanding their perspective. So one other thing, someone else said it, and I wish I could remember his name, empathy is not endorsement, but empathizing with someone's story has really changed me. That phrase has really helped me. How can you possibly talk to a Trump supporter? Well, I know Barbara. I've known her for years. I didn't know how she was going to vote this time because she's, you know, told me various things about her political views, but I know more about her to hate her for her vote, even though when I hear her talk about what she expected, it's just blows my mind in terms of, you know, risk versus Trump. It blows my mind, but I'm very curious to hear more.
I'm a high risk, high reward type.
Amazing.
And you know what, I just want to say one other thing in regard to that. I think different people, and it may split a little bit across party lines, but I think there's a tension between safety and freedom. And I think that you know, I think different people are drawn to different ends of that continuum. And I think we all would like to have the maximum of both, but again, reality, like human nature, kind of stinks sometimes. And we kind of have to choose our path as to which is more important to us. And I think that is also one of the underlying divisions between the left and the right.
Yeah. I think if I was on TED Talk stage, I would steal a quote from Abraham Lincoln that we use often in our presentations, but it's, I don't like that man. I must get to know him better.
Wow. I'm sold. If I'm in your audience, all of you, that is wonderful. Very, very inspiring. Thank you. Last question, similar format. And if we can wrap this one up, we will have about 20 minutes left for audience Q&A, which I think will be fantastic. Now, instead of standing on stage at a TED Talk, you're standing before an audience of 2,500 graduating seniors at high school. And it is their high school graduation. And they're all moving into the next chapter of their lives. What is the first thing that you'd tell them to instill a sense of hope, empowerment, and inspiration for their involvement in politics and their political future? How would you captivate the youth today? Anyone who wants to go?
I would say be courageous. Be courageous enough to express what you think, but also be courageous enough to listen to ideas that may challenge what you think.
You know, the way you phrased that, it really, you know, was hard for me to think of something, but I do a lot of workshops with teens. I've actually had teens call me and say, I heard about Braver Angels. What I'm noticing from teens, and we did a workshop for all 500 high school seniors at one high school with several moderators. The thing they told me was they didn't believe civility was possible. But after we did the workshop on teaching what we call the LAP skills, listen, acknowledge, pivot, and perspective, we gave them, instead of a formal evaluation, I gave them Post-it notes the size of a 3x5 card. And I said, what are you taking away from this? And the comments did make me cry later when I read them and reflected. I'm going to try this with my dad. I didn't know I could do this, My friend and I have been arguing forever, and you had us in the same group, and we actually had a conversation. So I grew up in that framework where you saw my dad and I respecting people of both parties. But the role model from social media, and like I grew up, there was no cable television, so we didn't have, the news was 1 hour at night. It wasn't a 24-hour news cycle, and we weren't getting constantly bombarded with negative messages and name calling and the kinds of things that I would never have heard of as a kid, in most cases, watching the news. And now you see it all the time.
It's interesting, Ellie Sears and I did a lap demonstration in front of, I think it was about 500 high school students a couple of weeks ago. And I would say it seemed to go very well, and the feedback that we got from it was absolutely incredible. So I think what I derive from that is I have no idea what to say, but we can try to show them. We can demonstrate. We can be the thing that we're trying to prove.
Let's hear it, Maxim.
I just second what I've heard from the other three panelists. Barbara, I think courage is critical. So if I were talking to a bunch of high school students, I would say this is your opportunity to try to step out of, remind yourself, if you're uncomfortable, that's a challenge, not something to back away from. And I think that's so important to growth. Mary, you talked about specific lap skills, which is what Paul and I are always demonstrating. I could be specific with a bunch of young people about that. Try that, use that as a tool. If you're curious, be curious about other people and ask them their stories without judgment. And so I think there are a lot of challenges that high school students might be receptive to. Mostly what Barbara said, something like, if you're not uncomfortable, something's wrong. And so to get high school students to accept the idea that it's okay to be challenged and feel like an alien and a stranger, it's okay, and you can work beyond it. So thank you guys for inspiring.
You can learn to love that feeling.
Yeah. I think I would, a lot of people sitting in like a commencement ceremony or something, they might be looking for direction. So I would say pinpoint what really activates you, whether that's positively or negatively, and lean heavily into that. That will tell you your next step. And so even in reaction to the election, was there a particular issue that is really activating you right now? And go lean into that. For me, I had a skewed view of people experiencing homelessness. And I went to volunteer at the homeless shelter, and it totally shook. And to Barbara's point, it was a vulnerable move, but it absolutely changed my perspective. So just if you don't know where to go, what to do next, pinpoint what is activating you right now.
Thank you all. This is such fantastic insight, and it can be extended not just to high school students or students in general, but all young people, all middle-aged, all people, period. Because we are all lifelong learners. We are all students all the time. So we are now going to transition into our audience Q&A portion. Thank you, audience members, for submitting some wonderful questions. Some of them have been answered asynchronously. Some of them I'll be asking here. And in the interest of time, maybe we'll have only one or two panelists answer each question. So the first one is, I think, a very common sentiment across the country today, and a very important one for Braver Angels to address, which is why I'm going to ask it first. Somebody asked, speaking as a young woman, I can say that my fear regarding the upcoming administration is not one about the economy, but about my fundamental rights. How do you bridge a conversation with someone who feels this way? Go for it, Mary.
I want to jump on this one because right after the Roe v. Wade decision came out and people were actually in the streets, pro-life, pro-choice, protesting, very, very upset. I contacted the people at the national level. I said, this is the time I want to do a common ground workshop on pro-life, pro-choice. And they're going, right now? And I go, right now. This is when we need to do it. So what was so amazing is we had a group of pro-life, a group of pro-choice, and they discussed the values, concerns, and solutions they each have. They came up with their unanimous decisions on their own side, and then you share them and you try to find unanimous values, concerns, and solutions. What started the event were personal stories. And that is the key. That's where I would start. I would say, I really have concerns about myself as a woman, and and you have to be sincere. I'm really curious about how you came to your view on this, and really hear it, because when the women and there were men shared their personal stories, it made sense to me why they were pro-life or pro-choice, whether I agreed with it or not. And the most amazing thing, nobody believed this could happen. We had 87% unanimous agreement. The only things that weren't agreed upon were the all or nothing. But it was the personal stories and the curiosity that made that possible. So, you know what I recommend? Mónica Guzmán's book. I never thought about it that way. It's all about how to engage with curiosity and how to approach tough topics. And it's mind-changing. It's really an amazing book.
Thank you, Mary. Maxim, would you like to address the question?
Well, I wanted to address the first question. Oh, is that okay? I choose a different question? Just quickly,
Sure.
I believe I know Colin, so he can see me. I can't see him. So that's interesting. And then I'd like to answer, how can we build out the political middle? I think we have a political middle. I think most Americans really feel that they have a lot in common with most other Americans, but commonality doesn't make news. News has to focus on difference and strife, so or else you won't sell the papers. And I think media has done a lot to polarize us because it needs to. And then there was another aspect to that question. Whoops, can't find it. Well, that'll be all for now, Colin. Talk to you some other time.
Let me jump in on that. And nobody has paid me to say this, but our two-party system, I think, is in a way fundamentally corrupt. It has become a monster. So if we could do something about that, that is, I think, the number one thing that I think would make a big difference in the health of the American political system and our government. And, so that would be, a more centralist third party to elbow aside one or the other, or maybe both, of the monstrous parties that are running our country today. There's a book, by the way, Michael Porter, a Harvard economist, has done an analysis of the duopoly and how utterly stable and harmful duopolies can be. And that's what we have. We have a duopoly that prevents the entrance of anybody else into the political system.
Thank you, Paul and Maxim. Barbara, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I wanted to just respond to the question about reproductive rights, because as a red, people may be interested in knowing what a red perspective on that is. The Dobbs decision did take the right to abortion out of from the federal level, but the states, each citizen has a right and responsibility within their state to vote how they want reproductive rights to be handled within their state. So in California, there's like nothing has been taken away. In some of the more redder states, rights have been reduced, but it's up to the people in those states to make their desire known, you know, how they want abortion to be handled in their state. And it kind of goes back to, you know, things being addressed at the local level, at more of a local level rather than at the federal government level. But I did want to say something about how to bring together, how to find a middle. And I'm going to take a little bit of a different tack on that, because we do have a new initiative in Braver Angel called Civic Renewal. And Mary mentioned, I forget exactly what you said, Mary, but something is an action word. And civic
Hope.
Hope is an action word. So civic renewal is all about taking action at local community level to make things happen in your community that need to happen, without focusing on who leans right, who leans left. There's a problem in the community. Let's figure out how to solve this problem. And we have many cases now growing across the country within Braver Angels and outside of Braver Angels, where community members are getting together to work on local initiatives on affordable housing, on transportation, on all sorts of issues, where citizens like take their responsibility of citizenship back into their own hands and bring their ideas, their creativity, their problem solving to civic leaders, to public officials, to, in a bipartisan, transpartisan way, to make their positions known, their ideas known, their solutions known as a community. And I think, will this create a middle? I don't know if it will create an ideological middle, but it will create harmony within the community and bring together people in very much the way that Brady was talking about, that we, you know, each of us has something to contribute. We need to recognize the humanity and the strength of working together to solve problems. So I'm on that support team for Civic Renewal, and I'm really excited about where that's going to take us, because I think it really will bring communities together.
Sarah, one question that seems to be coming up is the red-blue thing. And I want to just make it clear. You do not have to be put in a red or blue box. You can sign up for a red-blue workshop if that's your interest, but we don't make you be red or blue. There is a place for other, there is a place for libertarian. Some people like purple, other people don't like purple. So they do look for balance in the organization, so maybe in membership, but I still don't believe you're forced in red or blue, but I could be, okay, thank you, Brady. So he's on the organizational level, so he knows that. And so just know that we are open to all viewpoints, and that I'm a moderator, so I rarely ever say my color leaning because it influences how people perceive my moderation. I've used Paul. I actually had him observe me moderate, and I said, look for my bias, look for my blue bias, and he gave me some hints. And so I'm uncomfortable with the labels because I don't feel affiliated with either party. I agree with Paul. There's too much money in politics. Maybe the Forward Party is my next place. I don't know. But labels can be damaging, but when we use them, we try to use them to help build understanding and balance, but we're not forcing labels on people. So I just want to clear that up.
Thank you so much. And I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. I'm going to kind of synthesize a couple questions into maybe hopefully one catch-all in the interest of time, which is this. How can you hold your party accountable and ensure that you are making informed decisions at the ballot and maybe making decisions that aren't misguided or clouded by like your initial emotional response to, a candidate's outwardly appearance or their party affiliation. How do you ensure that you are being a good player in your party and a good player in the democracy with this hyperpolarization that is happening?
I can take a crack at starting that. What comes to mind is actually what Paul mentioned earlier and kind of his story in that I think you said something like, you didn't leave the left, but the left left you. And that tells me there was a certain set of values that Paul embraced that he stayed true to. And where that put him along the spectrum along the way, he's like, call me what you want kind of thing. But these are my values. Um, and so stay true to those, I guess is what I'd say. But then also, as soon as you disagree with something on your side or you find some areas of critique, I think it's really easy nowadays to just jump ship and just find the next thing that you may feel comfortable with. But there's a lot of power in changing from within. So you implied it in the question, but how can you how can you push boundaries from within rather than jumping ship and throwing rocks from the outside to change systems? But that's where I don't really feel as comfortable on, my side per se, but I do feel motivated to critique from within and try and push change from the inside.
I can just do a response. I was scanning through the questions too, and I think it's incumbent on all of us when we see flaws or dangers or things that we don't like on quote unquote our side. I think it's really important that we raise those critiques. I think people on each side need to look at their side objectively and be vocal about what is what they disagree with or what they think is not appropriate. One of the questions I saw for myself and Paul was, do we worry about Trump's policies, how they will affect the environment? Yes, I do. I do worry about that. And my, that's where the checks and balances come in. I think that's where we need those constraints on one party domination. There were a few questions related to that. We need those checks and balances. That's how our government was originally structured. I think when Mary and I, one of the times when Mary and I first met, this was after the 2020 election. We had known each other for a little bit, but not very long. And I was like, well, at least we can hope for gridlock. And she was horrified. She was like, what are you saying? We want to get stuff done. And I'm like, we do want to get stuff done, but we don't want to get just anything done. We want to get things done that both sides can agree on. So I was being a little flippant about the gridlock, but I truly believe that those constraints are really important.
Thank you. All right, Paul, one last question, then we're going to do our wrap-ups.
Yeah, I just want to say, I want to take a lesson from family therapy that I think actually can be used on a larger scale. And, in family therapy, you really have to see when something is a systems problem. And what you often see in family therapy is one person is blamed, but actually the system is the problem. And if you just help one person in a family therapy situation like that, you fail because you have to address the system. And my point in all this is, I actually don't think we have a problem with individual Americans. I think fundamentally the problem is a systems problem. And I think it's going to have to be addressed on that level.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all of your input. We have one last question. We're going to do a speed round. We kind of addressed it a little bit in the panel, but this one's a little bit more scoped in. And then we're going to have our final remarks in the final 2 minutes of this call. The last question is, how do we engage the youth? let's say they're too young to vote. Maybe they can vote. Maybe they're busy. Maybe they're a little bit apolitical or they feel very disaffected. How do we engage them as Braver Angels, as Forward Party, as, activists and volunteers?
I know someone wanted to hear from Brady, so go ahead, Brady. But I do, as a former teacher, I have some ideas too, because I did engage kids in those things.
I guess the only reason why I feel qualified is because I'm no longer in the youngest generation. So I'm a millennial, and thinking about Gen Z, or I guess younger millennials, but it's already so embedded. I'm so encouraged by the younger generations in their response, their activism, their communal response to what they're experiencing in the world, even if that challenges some of what they've inherited in terms of their family, or which creates its own issues. But I think there's a lot of they're putting words to thoughts that I think a lot of kids have in growing up from any generation. And I think for maybe older people, that we just need to create more space in civil discourse for their voices and hold them to equal value as just that, their voices. So they may be more inexperienced or not as well read on certain issues, but how they're arriving at the conversation, and more importantly, how they're treated when they're in those conversations, is going to be most impactful. And I think some of the educators in the room could speak to that. But yeah, I guess just create more opportunities to get younger voices in the room, because they're passionate. It's not that they don't want to, it's just, where can we bring their voice to the table more?
All right, looks like we got some hands up. Mary, Barbara, Paul. I know, Mary, your hand's not up, but we want to hear your input, so go for it.
Well, I say start young. I worked with kids as young as kindergarten, and we went and gleaned the fields, meaning picking vegetables from this community garden after everybody left them, and we got them to the homeless shelters. My students, I taught elementary school. My students were actively involved in local issues from very early age, and parents loved it. They didn't think I was doing anything radical. I also think modeling, we have to model civil discourse. We have to model civility. I don't think, I have a granddaughter and she's little, and I'm so glad my son doesn't watch any of the cable news stuff until she's in bed. She doesn't need to hear that at such a young age. And the last thing I'll say, I know I'm harping on the word hope, and maybe that's a snowflake blue thing. But climate change is really important to me. That was a big part of how I voted, because I'm concerned about what I hear. But I also hear people glooming and dooming the world in a way that is making kids feel they're not going to live. And I try to help them find examples of where people are doing things that will help climate change, and looking how they can do things. So I think when kids at any age feel empowered to take action, then they see the possibility of their own worth. And that's what I try to get kids to see, is what can you do to solve this problem? And it can start very, very young. I see it in my 18-month-old granddaughter. She was being so compassionate with this boy on the playground that got hurt, and that's been modeled from her parents. She went over, gave him a hug. It was really sweet. So.
Thank
Now,
you.
just
Yeah,
quickly-
please.
Yeah, really quickly, this is not a paid endorsement for the Forward Party, but it's no secret that this election was one where neither candidate was truly beloved by wide swaths of the population. So it seems to be a perfect time to really think about, problems, new creations. It's an opportunity for kids to think about new parties, like the Forward Party, like No Labels, like the Libertarian Party. They're brought, let young people, high school students, think about, there are other possibilities for how do we conduct elections. I think we need to be creative at this time. The world has changed greatly, but we haven't changed how we do things. And this seems to be a time ripe for changing how we do things. And I really applaud the Forward Party. Like I said, it's not a paid endorsement, but I think it has great potential.
Thank you, Barbara. And thank you all. And we applaud Braver Angels strongly. And I know we're all, not necessarily in the same room. We can't see or hear each other, but can you please, from wherever you're listening to this tonight, give a big, huge round of applause to these incredibly courageous Braver Angels, volunteers, and workers who really dedicate so much of their time every day to uniting and depolarizing America through community, connection, and conversation. One of the questions that kept coming up in the Q&A was, how can Forward Party and Braver Angels help each other? And I think that a really great way to help each other is to inform our respective communities about each other. So in that spirit, we would like to share with you all some information about how to get more involved with Braver Angels. Please feel free to scan these QR codes or visit the links that are at the bottom of this slide, or we can disseminate this information after the panel. Please check out Braver Angels' website. Their YouTube channel is phenomenal. I actually have a very, very close friend who was in a romantic relationship with someone who completely was on a very different page from her politically, and they had a Braver Angels conversation with each other, and it's on YouTube, and it's fantastic. So please peruse through their YouTube, their social media, and get connected with your local Braver Angels communities. And as far as how you all can support Forward Party, on the next slide, we have some similar QR codes for Forward Party. We are an aspiring ballot qualified political party. We're not there yet. We need about 80,000 registered voters to be a party and to introduce new labels into the political conversation. And the more we advocate towards this, maybe at one of the future Braver Angels panels, there won't just be red and blue lanyards. Maybe we can introduce more colors into the conversation. So if you'd like to help advance that effort, scan this QR code and register to vote Forward Party. It won't impact any part of your experience as a registered voter for the next 4 years. And you can also join our Slack. That is where we have a lot of our communications going all day, every day. That's how we make a lot of community with each other. Or you can send us an email, California-co-chairs@forwardparty.com if you'd rather reach out to us that way. Thank you all so much. I understand we're a few minutes past the end time, so thank you for sticking it out for these last 4 minutes. And thank you again to our amazing Braver Angels panelists, and special shout out to Susan Rico, who made this all happen. And we hope you all have a fantastic rest of your night. Please get in touch with Braver Angels and Forward Party and each other, because that is how we depolarize America. Thank you all so much, and have a fantastic evening.